everyone! Welcome back to my YouTube podcast for the Medical Technology Laboratory Science series. In this video, I'm going to present my PowerPoint presentation while you listen to my simple discussion that may help you in your future examinations and or if you want to explore our field, then you can just watch this video and listen to it. If you want to listen to more discussions, then you can just subscribe on my YouTube channel and don't forget to like, and it's a bonus for me if you will ring the bell for notifications. Okay, so let's start. So our topic for today is all about clinical laboratory. So we will be discussing RA 4688, also known as the Clinical Laboratory Act of 1966. So before that, you grab your headphones and while doing something, while doing anything, you can listen to my podcast. So what is RA 4688? It is also known as the Clinical Laboratory Law of 1966. Why 1966? Because it was made effective on June 18, 1966. So under this law, the implementing guidelines are contained in Administrative Order number 59 series of 2001, and that was approved on November 19, 2001. So what is all about this Administrative Order number 59 series of 2001? So it's all about the rules and regulations governing the establishment, operation, and maintenance of clinical laboratories in the Philippines. And under this act, it is composed of 13 sections. So for the complete title, you can just check on the screen. It's all about the rules and regulations governing the establishment, operation, and maintenance of clinical laboratories in the Philippines. But there is also a revised version of these rules and regulations, and that is contained in Administrative Order number 27 series of 2007. But in this video, I'm going to discuss all about the rules and regulations of AO number 59 series of 2001. So this law, it is all about matters concerning a clinical laboratory. You all know that a clinical laboratory, it is the place where we work as a medical technologist or laboratory scientist, where we perform tests, we perform special procedures from the samples we have collected from our clients or patients. And with these samples, we run it on laboratory automations. And from that laboratory automations, we will generate accurate and reliable results. And with these accurate and reliable results, we can aid for the patient's diagnosis. So we are like the star in the laboratory because we do aid in the diagnosis of the patient's condition with the laboratory results we generate from the laboratory automations in the laboratory. So what is the primary purpose of a clinical laboratory? So it is to determine the character and quantity of various chemical substances in the blood and other body fluids. So aside from the blood that we are exposed to in the laboratory, we also deal with other body fluids. So what are these other body fluids we are referring to? So we are referring to the urine specimens, seminal fluids, sputum samples, cerebrospinal fluid, gastric fluid, and many more. And another purpose is to prevent the operation and maintenance of substandard, of improperly managed and poorly equipped clinical laboratories. Okay, so we start with section 1. So what is all about section 1? It contains the title. Usually it starts with the title of this law. So what is the title? It's all about the rules and regulations governing the establishment, operation, and maintenance of clinical laboratories in the Philippines. So basically, what are we going to encounter in this clinical laboratory law? It's how to establish, how to operate, and how to maintain a clinical laboratory. So you remember this title. And for the section 2, it's all about authority. So who has the authority or the power of implementing the rules and regulations under this administrative order number 59? So it's the Department of Health through the Bureau of Health Facilities and Services, or the BHFS, in the health regulation cluster. So they are the ones who will exercise the regulatory functions under this administrative order number 59, series of 2001. So again, for section 2, it's all about authority. Section 1 is title. That of the section 2 is all about the authority. So the Secretary of Health through the BHFS, they shall be charged with the responsibility of strictly enforcing the provisions of this act, and they shall be authorized to issue these rules and regulations under AO number 59, series of 2001. So for section 3, it's all about purpose. Purpose of this act. So these rules and regulations, they are enacted, they are promulgated for the purpose of the following, and that is mainly to protect and promote health of the people. So how are they going to do this? Protecting and promoting health of the people by ensuring availability of clinical laboratories that are properly managed with adequate resources, and a clinical laboratory that complies with quality standards. So that's the main purpose, to protect and promote health of the people by ensuring availability of clinical laboratories. And these clinical laboratories, it must be properly managed, and it shall have an adequate resources for the laboratory services they will provide, and they must comply with the quality standards. Section 4. For Section 4, it's all about scope. Scope. So what's the scope of this law? The scope is it shall apply to all organizations or institutions performing the activities and functions of clinical laboratories, which shall include this: examination and analysis of any or all samples of human and other related tissues, fluids, excretions, radioactive, or other materials from the human body for the determination of pathogenic organisms, for the determination of pathologic processes or the disease, and for the determination of the conditions in the person from whom the samples are collected. So the scope, it must apply to all organizations performing these activities, examination and analysis of these samples. But under this administrative order, it does not include government laboratories doing laboratory examinations limited only to AFB microscopy, malarial screening, cervical, cervical cancer screening. But they will be included in the scope of this law if the services are declared as extension of a licensed government clinical laboratory. So again, the scope of these rules and regulations will be applied to all organizations, institutions performing this activity. Example, examination and analysis of these samples for the purpose of determining pathogenic microorganisms, its pathology, and the conditions of the patients from whom the samples are collected. but it does not include government laboratories offering services such as AFB microscopy or acid fast bacilli smear, malarial screening, and cervical screening. But if provided these government laboratories, their services are declared as extension of a licensed government clinical laboratories, then they are also included in this scope. Okay, so for section 5 is very important because from this segment, we are going to classify the type of laboratories. So mainly under this section, section 5, it's classification of laboratories. Classification of laboratories. So how are we going to classify the laboratories, the clinical laboratories? They can be classified according to function, by institutional character, and by service capabilities. So these are the three important classifications of a clinical laboratory: by function, by institutional character, and by service capabilities. So classification of a clinical laboratory by function, it is subdivided into two. It can be a clinical pathology or an anatomic pathology. So when we talk about clinical pathology, it will include all clinical sections, clinical subjects of the medical technology profession, such as hematology, clinical chemistry, microbiology and parasitology, mycology, clinical microscopy, immunology, serology, blood banking, endocrinology, toxicology, therapeutic drug monitoring or TDM, and other similar disciplines. So that includes um, these subjects, it is under clinical pathology. And that of the anatomic pathology, we have surgical pathology, immunohistopathology, cytology. It also includes autopsy and forensic pathology. So again, according to function, clinical laboratories are divided as either clinical pathology, which includes the clinical subjects of or clinical sections of the medical technology profession, and that of the anatomic pathology, it's more on surgical pathology, immunohistopathology, cytology, and it also includes autopsy and forensic pathology. What about according to institutional character? So how are we going to classify a clinical laboratory under this category? So it can either be a hospital based, or we can call it as institution based, and counterpart for that is non-hospital based or non-institution based. So simply, when we talk about hospital based laboratory or institutional based laboratory, it is a laboratory operating within the hospital. Or institutional based, we do not only pertain to a hospital, but there are also clinical laboratories, diagnostic laboratories that can be found inside a university. So we can also classify this laboratory that operates inside the university diagnostic laboratory as hospital-based or institutional-based. They operate within the premises of a certain institution. On the other hand, that of the non-hospital based, it's located outside an institution or outside the hospital. These are commonly known as the freestanding laboratory. So they do operate on their own. So that's how are we going to classify institutional character: hospital-based and non-hospital-based. And by service capabilities, this includes a primary laboratory, secondary laboratory, and tertiary laboratory. So it will be based from the laboratory services offered in that specific clinical laboratory. So if if a clinical laboratory provides minimum capabilities, such as, for example, routine hematology, or commonly the complete blood count for routine hematology, routine urinalysis, routine fecal analysis, blood typing that is hospital-based, and quantitative platelet determination that is hospital-based, then we classify this laboratory as primary laboratory. So again, under primary laboratory services, they will offer minimum service capabilities such as routine hematology. Example is the complete blood count, routine urinalysis, routine fecalysis, blood typing that is hospital-based, and quantitative platelet determination hospital-based. What about if they will provide the minimum service capabilities of a primary laboratory plus the following: routine clinical chemistry. And this will now be in that secondary laboratory. So for the secondary laboratory, it will offer primary services plus additional to that is the routine clinical chemistry. So under routine clinical chemistry, they offer blood glucose determination, blood urea nitrogen, blood uric acid, and creatinine, plus the lipid profile tests such as total cholesterol, triglycerides, the high density lipoprotein, and the low density lipoprotein. So what is added in that secondary laboratory with their services is the routine clinical chemistry. What about that of the tertiary laboratory? So you just include all the secondary services plus they will offer special chemistry, special hematology, serology, and immunology, and they also offer microbiology. So with a tertiary laboratory, they will offer specialized procedures for chemistry, hematology, for immunology and serology, and microbiology. Okay, so that's how are we going to classify these laboratories according to function, institutional character, and service capabilities. And that is under section 5 of RA 4688 contained in AO number 59 series of 2001. The revised version of this AO number in AO number 27 series of 2007, the difference will lie on the classification of the laboratories. Okay, section 6. Section 6, it's all about the policies. So what are the policies under this act? So there should be an approved permit to construct. So whenever someone is planning to have your own clinical laboratory, so you need to remember the policies under this act. It must be approved by the BHFS or the Bureau of Health Facilities and Services, the permit to construct and the design layout of your clinical laboratory if you're planning to establish your own clinical laboratories. And the plans should be approved and the construction of permit shall be issued again by the Bureau of Health Facilities and Services before constructing your clinical laboratory. And lastly, not the last one, but clinical laboratories shall have a valid license. Again, it will be issued by BHFS and or the CHD or Center for Health Development before you can operate your own clinical laboratory. And another, the clinical laboratory shall be organized and managed to provide effective and efficient laboratory services. Of course, that's the purpose why we will establish a clinical laboratory. It should be organized and properly managed so that we can offer these efficient and effective laboratory services. And lastly, the clinical laboratories shall provide adequate and appropriate safety practices for its personnel and clients. So you need to prepare prepare safety laboratory safety precautions. You need to follow safety precautionary measures by providing safety equipments in your laboratory. And for section 7, these are all about requirements and procedures for the application of permit to construct and license to operate. So this permit to construct and the license to operate, you will be needing this whenever you will establish your own clinical laboratory. Not only that, but there are also sub-requirements under that specific requirement. So for the application for permit to construct, down to that of the terms and conditions of license, that is under Section 7. So for number 1, application for permit to construct, you will need to prepare the following: letter of application, 4 sets of site development plans, floor plans, and for the application for a new license, you need to have a form for that. So you can read it on the screen. And application for renewal of license, if you're going to renew your license, if you already have your clinical laboratory. So you will be needing a application for that also, application form. What about for the renewal of license? For the renewal of license, so before, for regions NCR, you can see it on the screen. There is a specific schedule for each region. So from NCR down to that of the other region. So there's specific month, period of month on when they can renew the license of their clinical laboratories. But now, all are scheduled on the month of October, and it must be filed 90 days before the expiration date. So it must be filed within 90 days or equivalent of 3 months before the expiration date of the license of your clinical laboratory. Okay, and for the penalties, you can read it on the screen. If the application is filed during the next 2 months after expiration date, if you do not follow with their requirements, then you can have these penalties. And we're not yet done with section 7. So for the inspection, it's every 2 years or as necessary, and it will be conducted. The inspection is conducted by the director of the Bureau of Health Facilities and Services and or the director of the CHD or Center for Health Development or their authorized representatives. For the monitoring, it's monitored regularly, and the records of your clinical laboratory must be made available to determine compliance with these rules and regulations under AO number 59 series of 2001. And for the issuance of license, it's the director of the CHD or his authorized representative who will issue the license of your clinical laboratory. And for the monitoring, I'm done with that. And for the terms and conditions of the license is granted upon the compliance with the license requirements. And the license, it's not transferable. And if you have an extension laboratory, then it shall have a separate license. And if the owner, for example, in case or the authorized representative of that clinical laboratory is desiring to transfer a location, transfer a licensed clinical laboratory to another location, you must inform again the Center for Health Development in writing at least 15 days before the actual transfer. And another, for the terms and conditions of the license, the laboratory in its new location shall be subject again to re-inspection. Okay, so for section 8, it's all about violations. So what are the violations that is committed by the owner of the clinical laboratory or any personnel having or working in the clinical laboratory? The number one violation under this AO number is operating a clinical laboratory without a certified pathologist or without a registered or without registered medical technologists. So that is a violation to the rule. You are operating your clinical laboratory without the supervision, without the head of the laboratory, and that is the pathologist, and of course, registered medical technologists are very important for um, a clinical laboratory to function. And another violation, the second one, is you are changing the your ownership, change of ownership, change of location, the head of the laboratory or personnel without informing the BHFS or CHD. It's very important that you must notify them if you are planning to do that. And number three, you refuse to allow inspection of the clinical laboratory. You must um, open your clinical laboratory for inspection because it's a requirement under this act. And gross negligence, any act or omission detrimental to the public, is a violation under these rules and regulations. So that's section 8. For section 9, if you violate those rules, then there must be an investigation of the charges or the complaints. And who will investigate? It will be the Bureau of Health Facilities and Services again, the director of the CHD or duly authorized representatives. They will investigate the complaints and verify if the laboratory concerned or the laboratory personnel is guilty of the act. So any person found violating RA 4688, what will happen? It will be suspended. The license will be revoked by again the BHFS or the CHD or their representatives, duly authorized representatives. And any person operating a clinical laboratory without proper license from the Department of Health shall upon conviction be subjected to imprisonment. So they can be imprisoned with that violation. And any clinical laboratory operating without a valid license or whose license has been revoked shall be summarily closed. So that's all about Section 9. And for Section 10, it's all about modification and revocation of license. Section 11, this is also included in other Republic Acts concerning the medical technology laws, repealing clause, and that of the Section 12. It's all about the publication and list of license of clinical laboratories, and it's published annually in the newspaper. And for Section 13, it's all about effectivity date. So the end and the effectivity date of that RA 4688, it was made effective on what date? That is June 18, 1966. Okay, so that's all for today. And I hope you have learned something from this YouTube podcast for the Medical Technology series. And thank you. And please don't forget to like, to subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications for more videos to come. Thank you and have a good day.